We'll talk Star Wars and specifically Star Wars Battlefront on today's video. Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. So this week we've talked Andor, we've had a couple lore videos, some news. Time for something a little bit different because we're looking at specifically Star Wars gaming, and a game that I know is close to many of your hearts, Star Wars Battlefront. So this video came to me today as I was watching some of the leaked Battlefield 6 footage. I can't show that here, however, it's probably NDA'd, but I was thinking about this same topic when I saw a Dexerto post showing Battlefield 4, which somehow, and this blows my mind, is 12 years old. I've never mentioned this on the channel before, but I was massive into the old Battlefield games. Battlefield 3 and Battlefield Bad Company 2 especially. I was big time into them with my buddies. We used to do the Xbox Live Party chat, and there was something about those games. Yes, Battlefield's trailers were heavily scripted, but everyone who's played the game knows there were real moments where you felt like you were in the middle of something that was just happening, a massive cinematic battle that was happening around you, which you were just a small part of. The way infantry and armor and vehicles and the destruction worked together, well, those games are truly something special. And when I learned that Star Wars would be releasing an EA Battlefront game in 2015, well, I was very excited because of how Battlefield had played in the past and because of, as you're seeing on screen, my love of the classic Battlefront games. To me, the formula seemed so simple. Take what makes Battlefield so great, the scale, the combat, the squad mechanics, the destruction, add a Star Wars skin to it, which should, in fact, make the game even more cinematic, and you've got a massive recipe for success. I wanted what it seems like most people wanted, which was Battlefield in Star Wars. EA unfortunately did not deliver on that. I mean, this was to me even more surprising given the fact that DICE worked with the Frostbite engine. They made Battlefield games. It just didn't work out, and I have some theories about why I'll get to in just a moment, but these new iterations of the Battlefront series were clearly, I don't know, neutered, I guess. Also, I'm going to mix up Battlefield and Battlefront. Make fun of me down in the chat. But whereas Battlefield was generally a pretty open experience where you have a large terrain, you get to choose the loadout of your soldier, play pretty much however you want, Battlefront, especially the first game, was far more limited. It felt to me like instead of a character with equipment and weaponry, you were essentially a hero with abilities. You do have grenades, but it's more like a grenade ability rather than the full control you'd expect in a first or third person shooter. The battles were toned down, everything was just a bit clunkier, and I think if you've played the game, even if you like Battlefront, which I did, especially the second game, you're probably nodding your head in agreement. Even Battlefront 2, instead of being like a wide open war game, at times felt more like a very heavily controlled, not quite hero shooter, but something else. There wasn't the same sort of emergent gameplay you get from Battlefield, and this is where we get to the speculation. In my opinion, it was actually Disney/Lucasfilm who made the game look this way. So I spent a lot of time in 2017 through 2020 going to EA events, talking to people. I tested versions of Battlefront or played versions of Battlefront you guys never saw. We talk about features that you guys never heard about, potential expansions for the game, DLC, whatever. None of that can I talk about specifically, but although I was never told this by an employee, I got the distinct feeling that they were limited in what they could do. For example, and this has been said publicly, at the time, heroes had to use hero stuff. Rebel troopers had to use rebel rifles. They had to fly rebel A-wings. This is part of the reason why instead of climbing into a vehicle and just flying away, joining the battle, you basically spawn into one. I also think there were limitations with the engine. We saw this in later game modes, which were clearly not working very well. Look at something like Capital Supremacy, which seemed held together by cutscenes and duct tape, compared to the more fluid experiences offered in Battlefield. I think just generally that comes down to the limitations when creating the game, and honestly, I think it hurt Battlefront until the very end. I imagine that's something Disney and Lucasfilm have probably moved away from, looking at how the IP has been used in games like Fortnite, for example. I do feel like there's a significantly better possibility of us getting a reskinned Battlefield for Battlefront 3 than there ever was for Battlefront 2. They wanted a heavily curated experience. They got it. It ended up being, I think, clearly to the detriment of the game. I've also talked before about how Battlefront had a lot on its plate. It had to essentially appease all Star Wars fans who, realistically, for the past decade or so, had not been getting games in any realistic number. So we see Battlefront 2 including everything from, traditional Battlefront combat to heroes versus villains, to a starfighter assault mode, which isn't in any way connected with the rest of the game. And we just have an unfocused experience because that's what Star Wars fans needed. There were no other major games really releasing during the early sequel trilogy, which is wild to say. All that notwithstanding, Battlefront 2 especially ended up being a very fun experience. It was well supported for a time by EA. However, alongside the game's structural issues, it also had an incredibly traumatic launch, and I was there. So for those who don't know, I, along with pretty much every Star Wars YouTuber at the time, this is where I first met pretty much everyone in the scene, went to test the game out. We played it, we went home, we made content, we made reviews. Then the game launched and things were radically different, especially regarding how you unlocked heroes. I still remember getting a group phone call from people at EA explaining that they were sorry because a lot of us, not me in particular, but some of the more Battlefront-focused creators were getting feedback for essentially lying during our reviews. When, of course, we weren't lying. What actually happened is things were changed without our knowledge and we weren't able to let our audience know. Some of you may not remember if you weren't in the scene, but the early backlash was incredible. The pride and accomplishment comment from EA's community team was, for a time, the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. It may still be. I actually knew quite well the community manager at the time. He quit shortly after this. And I certainly understood where fans were coming from at the time, but in retrospect, the backlash does seem, I guess slightly tame compared to what games are routinely doing nowadays. Anyway, development on Battlefront continued, and the devs for that game cared so much. They routinely had us in to give feedback from our community. They talked quite frankly with us about what they wanted to do in dream scenarios with the game, but they had two things I personally feel like working against them. The first being the realities of the game's somewhat limited engine and how it was designed, and two, the fact that frankly, the game had a declining player base, which made the choice to eventually discontinue support for Battlefront 2 all but inevitable. The team gave a lot of extra content, but it clearly, especially after changes made to monetization and whatnot, was not viable as a longer term thing. That being said, it's time. It's beyond time for Battlefront 3. The Star Wars universe has changed so much since the game stopped getting updates. We've got all these new characters, locations. The landscape has also changed as well, with EA not the only Star Wars publisher in town. I feel like now, more than ever, also, we need a multiplayer game. We got Jedi 3 coming, we got the new strategy game coming, perhaps Eclipse and the KOTOR remake, not holding my breath. It's time for a big Star Wars multiplayer-focused experience, and I think it's clear Star Wars fans will come for that. Battlefront remains one of the most downloaded games on the PlayStation and Xbox App Store. There are still communities there, despite the games having obvious limitations and no more support. It's time, and I truly believe this, for the Battlefield reskin. It's time for the next massive Star Wars game, and I think Battlefront 3 would be that. Those are just my thoughts, though. Let me know yours below.